And so what we mean by sophistication is that last point in the AP rubric that will get you that full mark. In order to get that sophistication point, you have to do something more than just answer the question. You have to answer the question fully and completely in order to be eligible to qualify for this point. So this really only matters if you've been, like, say for instance on the last time, right? If you're in that 85 or higher range, then you're in an area where the sophistication point is going to be in play. If you are 77 or lower, then I really encourage you to go back and look at the stuff that we've been working on the last week and the week before, to try and get to that point where you can complete the answer. Okay. Because, worrying about sophistication and trying to be sophisticated when you're still at a point where you're trying to get the whole answer down on the paper, is just going to add another distraction for you. Because you cannot be incomplete and sophisticated at the same time. Something that you'll notice hopefully is that this sophistication has to kind of pervade throughout the response. It's not simply one line or one part that is sophisticated. The whole piece has to be, outstanding in its depth. Looking at the relevance of the writer's rhetorical choices, like really having a strong understanding of the situation and applying it to the analysis of the language, explaining the function of a passage and in terms of its complexity or its tension, using a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive, is a way to show sophistication. Responses that maybe lack that sophistication, but maybe look like they almost have it, are these other types where they try to contextualize in text, but it's usually sweeping generalizations. These are the A-push essays, the ones that come in and, I get a lot of, it's not bad contextualization of history, but instead of analyzing the words of the speaker, which is the point of the prompt, they spend most of the time talking about what they know about the historical moment that's happening. Again, it's not useless information, but if it isn't included specifically with the analysis, the deeper analysis of the language, it's going to be less valuable, less sophisticated. Hinting at some other arguments rather than really getting into it, looking at rhetorical choices, but not really looking at how those choices fit together throughout the passage, oversimplification, and an attempt to try to mask a shallow analysis with more complex grammar and syntax, are all identifiers and responses that maybe have the potential to be sophisticated but just aren't quite there. And so let's look at some examples. And so, before we do that, let's do this reminder. Excuse me. So, you don't get sophistication if you haven't written the complete answer. Okay. Like for instance, even if you have really vivid writing, if your logic and your line of reasoning is incomplete, then you're not going to get a sophistication point. And so again, this is today's lesson is for once you're at a point where you're getting, the answer complete, you're getting those 85s and higher. If you're still stuck at the 77, please go back and review WPAE, look at the building a line of reasoning lessons. The College Board set up a bunch of YouTube channels for each course. And so I don't know if you've been, going back and looking at these, but they do live lesson every day as well. I think at least 4 days a week. And so please check out that YouTube channel as well. I've linked a few of them on here on your Canvas page for you. But they have some on building line reasoning. They have some on writing analytical paragraphs. They have a bunch of lessons about the rhetorical situation and how to read more deeply, how to analyze different types of common rhetorical strategies, and stuff like that too. So there's a bunch of really helpful stuff on there. So definitely go check that out. Okay, so we're looking at the Women in Wartime prompts. This speech was given in 1942. The question asked you to analyze rhetorical choices that this Congresswoman made to get women to kind of prepare to sacrifice comfort and luxury for the war effort. And so you were looking at why Clare Boothe Luce set out to mobilize women on the home front in 1942 and how she did it, how she used, maybe something like maternal instinct to appeal to this audience. And so let's look at a paragraph from the first response here. So let's see. So this writer says, furthermore, Luce shows an immense understanding for her audience by later appealing to their sense of motherhood. While many women of the period felt liberated by their newfound purpose in the labor force and political system, many maintained their conservative perspective on the role of women in society. By introducing their children into the conversation, Luce is able to reignite a shared sense of Republican motherhood that united women as early as the American Revolution. In line 17, even if a woman sacrifices not giving her time to work like a man, it may be in instilling American morals of sacrifice, hard work, and democracy into the homes of future American leaders during a time when these morals are being disputed overseas. This appeal of motherhood further allows Luce to include all women in her plight during war and emphasize that no matter what the sacrifice may be, it is necessary to all women to make them play their part in the war effort and on the home front. And so, again, this is, I think, a pretty interesting contextualization of the history. And so it's not a bad response at all. I think this response has a lot of potential. I think where it's lacking a little bit in terms of gaining that sophistication point is that the focus is really more on the history than on the language. Okay. If you look at the part that I highlighted here in yellow, you can see the evidence from the speech itself that's being mentioned here in the analysis is light. Okay, there's not a whole lot of looking at the actual language in the speech itself. There's a lot of, I think, really interesting insight into what Luce might be referring to in terms of this idea of Republican motherhood, but the reference to instilling those values is not quite there because the writer doesn't go deeply into explaining how referring to their children is going to lead to a sense of shared Republican motherhood that united women as early as the American Revolution. Okay. If that's indeed the case, like where, mentioning the children is a reference to that Republican motherhood or whatever, then that is a really interesting and insightful point. But the problem is this part in the green is an extension of the writer's own reaction to that reference rather than an analysis of how the words in the speech indicate that reference is taking place and how Clare Boothe Luce is using it to try and be influential. And so really good idea. And it's just falls a little bit short here in this part where I've highlighted it in green. The explanation and the analysis, should include the history, which is important, but it also needs to really put it deeply back into the words, the language, and the speech. Okay, because she could clearly make an appeal to motherhood that doesn't include this idea of Republican motherhood, and so that's where they just need a little bit more specificity for this to really count for that sophistication point. And so, going back and looking at the criteria for that, that's sort of what we've highlighted, right? They've introduced an idea that's significant and relevant, and it's totally on point with this rhetorical situation idea, this bullet. It just isn't quite developed enough with explanation. They've examined rhetorical choices, but they haven't really examined the relationships among those choices.